Welcome everybody to another Fireside Chat with a Naturopath, brought to you by Health Buddha, a digital media company whose mission is to increase awareness of the naturopathic industry across Canada. I am your host, Naturopathic Dr. Christina Diavila, and today I have with me Dr. Kim Bretz. She is a naturopathic doctor who's been practicing since 2001, seeing a broad range of patients, including women's hormone health and diabetes, but her main focus is in gut health. She has worked with many family doctors and gastroenterologists to facilitate the best outcomes for patients using evidence-based testing and treatment. She also teaches at the University of Waterloo in the pharmacy department and has consulted for numerous companies, including supplement, lab, and pharmaceutical companies, and has been the clinical lead for a research trial through the University of Guelph, and is widely known as a public speaker and health educator across North America. Welcome, Dr. Kim Bretz.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
I'm excited to hear everything you have to say, especially with respect to the elimination diet and all things, dietary modifications. And so our topic today is really debunking the myths around the elimination diet. And so to really start off that conversation, let's talk about what is the elimination diet and what even triggers someone to seek that as a solution.
Absolutely. So I think especially because I see so many patients who have gut issues going on, we've really started to realize that food does play a part in health. I think it was in 2014 that the American College of Gastroenterologists came out with the position that, actually the patients have been right about this all along, and we're going to sometimes have symptoms that are affecting our gastrointestinal health. So that's the main area that I focus in. So the problem is, I think that these elimination diets, and I'll touch on that in a moment, but these elimination diets, all of a sudden, if people feel better when they take a food away, they actually think that that's the solution, and that they need to take these foods away forever and ever and ever. Mm-hmm. So basically an elimination diet, and it can come in many, many different forms, but it's simply taking foods out of the diet. So we'll have ones where people will take out and I think this is kind of standard for what we did maybe 10, 15 years ago. You take out the dairy and the soy and the eggs and the corn and the gluten and the sugar, and then you see if people feel better and try to figure out if you can bring stuff back. And then we've started seeing words like non-celiac gluten sensitivity, where people may feel better if they take gluten out, or people who are lactose intolerant or have a problem with histamine in food. We've also got these new diets for patients who have IBS or SIBO, where we take away the food that feeds the bacteria. And a lot of the time when we take this food away, we get people feeling better. So we see that all of a sudden their bloating and socially inappropriate gas goes down, or they don't have diarrhea anymore, or they're not belching, or they don't have abdominal pain. And that's really amazing when that happens, because their quality of life often goes up in certain ways, where all of a sudden you're not afraid to go to class in the morning and commute. You're able to eat breakfast before you leave because you aren't worried about where you're going to find a bathroom or something like that. I have moms who have just sobbed in my office because they can't go to their kids' soccer games because there's no bathrooms on site. So these elimination diets, they make it possible in a lot of cases for people to be able to move past some of their symptoms and improve their quality of life.
People who might be coming into your office who've maybe even already put themselves on an elimination diet as a way to say, I figured it out. If I don't eat gluten, I'm okay. What are the myths that you are hearing about the elimination diet? And, ultimately, why is it not a long-term solution?
Yeah. So first of all, there are a couple times that we have right now that it is actually, we don't have other options. So if someone's diagnosed with celiac at this point, although the research is really coming fast and furious in this area, the only option that we have is for you to take gluten out of your diet. Or if someone has like a nut anaphylactic reaction, the only solution that we have is for people to take these foods out and to keep them out. I am certainly not going to be suggesting that I can change that. And here, you eat this peanut while I hold your EpiPen. Like, that's not the scenario that we're going to be having around that. And I will also qualify, whenever I'm talking about food, I mean real whole food like apples and even things like pasta or chicken or eggs or things that can grow from the ground or come from an animal. If you don't feel good eating Kraft Dinner and Doritos, and I really highlight those foods because I know I'm not supposed to, but I actually quite enjoy those foods. If they make me feel bad, that's okay. That's a lot of chemicals and crap and processing, and that's not good for our body. But if people are not feeling good with real food, the elimination happens. The problem is, in most cases, the problem isn't actually with real whole food. The problem is much more with what is happening internally, and a lot of that has to do with what we call our human microbiota. So those are the bacteria that live in and on us. And it's kind of crazy to think about, but they're estimating the new number that they have is that we have about 40 trillion bacterial cells that live inside of us. And we always thought about them as bad in causing infections, but we've now realized that they have the ability to do a lot of good things, like decrease pain or keep our transit time normal so that we're not just randomly having 5 bowel movements a day at any given urgency point. They can help with keeping our mental health in check. They can help with lowering our blood sugar levels. So they can do all these things. So if we have an imbalance and we have more of the bad ones than the good ones, we can see gut symptoms happening really, really commonly. So when we do the elimination diet, what we basically do is we starve both the good and the bad bacteria, and we make the symptoms go away. But the problem is we didn't fix the bacteria. So we've just gone like this. So the symptoms go down, but what we need to do is really be looking at what's happening with those gut bacteria and trying to fix that. So if people just keep eliminating, what I find a lot of the time is people actually come in and they have already been playing around with food because we hear it so commonly. So they'll come in and they'll say, so this started and I heard that maybe dairy was the problem. So I took out dairy and it helped a bit. And so I did that, but then it started getting worse again and I still had the pain. So then I heard that I should take out gluten. And then I tried taking out gluten and that helped a little bit. And then I noticed that whenever I have beans or onions, I get bloated or it gives me reflux and I get that upper GI pain. And they come in, first of all, frustrated beyond belief because how many more foods can they take out? And then they're terrified that I'm going to ask them to take more out. And sometimes that is actually the reality, although my reality is that's 2 weeks. If we are not seeing changes in 2 weeks, we are not going to continue with that. And the goal is to get people starting to have food back often in 4 to 6 weeks when we start working on reintroductions. Because again, long term, it's not fixing the problem and people just keep taking away more and more and more things. And that's just not the solution. Because I feel like taking away food has become a badge of honor in some ways, that that's the solution. And the stricter we become, there's just this weird link with food, I think, that we're always riding that really fine line on it. But it also becomes part of the problem because it's not socially okay to be the person at work who can't eat the meal that's being served, or having to ask for the special thing at the wedding that you're going to, or trying to give your mother-in-law a crazy list of things and saying, this is what I need to do for Thanksgiving dinner. And having it go wrong anyways while everyone's grumbling that you're that person. it's so socially, mentally, and emotionally hard with that
Mhm.
when we are required to eat on a regular basis to stay alive as a human being.
Mhm.
And I think especially because we're taping this during the COVID pandemic, I'm seeing that more and more people, the stress around food is becoming even harder because we can't access it in the same way that we normally did.
Mhm.
You can't just pop out and grab something necessarily. So all of a sudden it's becoming, I think it's coming to the forefront on that this is not a sustainable way of doing things. So it really is one of my passions that it's not that I want people to be eating bucket loads of pasta or having cake all the time, but I also don't think it's great that every time someone has a bite of pasta at their in-laws' house, that they know that they're going to suffer.
Mhm.
And because it often doesn't have to be that way either.
There is a time and a place for the elimination diet, and it can be
Absolutely.
used quite appropriately to bring someone back to a state of health. So, how do you use this in your clinical practice?
So there's different sort of eliminations that we use for different people depending on what is going on. But most commonly, we do a 2-week elimination program where they're getting sort of the what to eat, what not to eat, and menu planners and recipes and how to deal with flavor and how to do it if you're vegan and all of those sorts
Mhm.
of things. So you sort of get all the resources that you need. You do it for a couple weeks. And then we see if people are feeling better. Because if it's happening around the gut stuff, because food is so intimately connected both with the gut itself and all those bacteria that live there, the changes actually happen very, very quickly for people. So most people, I give them up to 2 weeks to do the program. A lot of people will be feeling better a lot more quickly. And then we often do have people continue for another 2 to 4 weeks while we start to work on the gut microbiota. And that again is through food or what we call strain specific probiotics that have been specifically studied for this, or sort of gut healing side of things, or looking if there's nutrient deficiencies. But we actually do continue for another 2 to 4 weeks in most cases if patients can handle that. And I do actually hear from most people that when it's put into those sorts of timelines, it's not impossible. When you kind
Mhm.
of think about it as this is what I have to do for my entire life, that's a different thing. But in concentrated times, people are actually quite good with it. Um, but we continue with it for a bit longer because we actually see that starving the bacteria or changing the gut environment and the irritants that can be going in, if we change that, it can actually allow for the bacteria to shift a little bit. So things that we've seen in the research that it can lower some inflammation for a short period of time if we do it, or it can lower something called histamine, which we think about around allergies, or it can just stop some of the physical irritation that's happening to the gut. So we give it a little bit of a chance to take hold. And then once we move through that 4 to 6 week period of elimination, we actually start a really specific reintroduction of test food. So if we were looking at something like taking out fructose, we might consider bringing back honey or mango in really specific amounts.
Mhm. Um, and so for me, I think the most important thing that you said, and I think for everyone listening, is that food is still the primary element that we want to work with, but it's also
Absolutely.
everything around it in terms of supporting that gut health, looking at that microbiome, addressing those
Mhm.
nutritional deficiencies. And so it becomes such a complex picture that it's never just about one thing.
It's not. The good thing is, if we're looking at it from a population perspective, most people who have gut issues have irritable bowel syndrome. And that's the one that has the least damage that's happened. So, unfortunately, we are looking at some studies up to about a quarter of women actually have this in a sort of diagnosed way. And I think there's other women who probably have it who don't. But
Mhm.
upwards of, in general, 20% of the Canadian population will have something that falls into that category. So there's less of the healing and repair heartburn stuff that's happening, a lot of the gut bacteria stuff that's happening. But and then when we go into things like inflammatory bowel disease, where there's actually significant damage that's happened in most cases, and very, very significant nutrient deficiencies and losses that have happened. That is something that definitely takes much, much more time to deal with. But that's less of the population that we're looking at. So I do find it's actually kind of funny, because as much as people don't want to do an elimination and take foods out, sometimes it's actually harder to convince people to try the reintroduction, because all of a sudden they're feeling so much better. And they know why, because we go through the education so much on this. We really focus on it, but and I'm quite convincing, so it is something I actually find it harder to convince people to bring things back sometimes than to actually take things away. But I think if we're educated, and this is not an area that is difficult to educate patients on. It is, I sometimes feel like it's really quite simple, actually. And when people understand, it's much easier to make those choices and to feel like there's actually hope. And that's amazing.
If there's one thing you'd like to leave our audience with, what would it be, Dr. Kim?
Absolutely. That I don't believe that there are magical foods that are out there. There's not one thing that is going to amazingly cure everyone. But I think that food is magic. It really can make a huge difference in how we function as human beings, whether we're healthy or whether we're ill. It affects our quality of life. And I just simply believe everyone should be able to eat without pain. And that's physical pain, but that's also the mental pain of just not knowing what to eat or how to function in a human society where food is how we stay alive, but it's also our celebrations, and it's the way we commiserate, and not being able to have that is really hard. So I really just hope that people get the idea of how important food is, and that we don't want to have a lifelong struggle with it.
Well, thank you so much for that. For everyone who is listening and you're starting to think about your own gut health, you can find Dr. Kim Bretz online on her website at drkimbretznd.com. And you can find her on Instagram. So follow her at Dr. Kim Bretz ND. Obviously, we will have all of this information on our social media platform on Health Buddha. Don't forget to like our video and subscribe to our channel for future fireside chats. And we hope to see you again soon, Dr. Kim.
Oh, thank you very much. That was really fun.